All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, Govern Me Daddy t-shirts are now for sale online at Kentucky for Kentucky, a nod to one of the more unexpected sex symbols of the coronavirus era. Apparently, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear's COVID leadership style has sparked a legion of adoring and very thirsty fans. Salon explained the phenomenon this way. Constituents stuck at home, anxious and restless, are getting extremely horny for this big dad energy. Now, I actually know and I like Andy Beshear, but no, people, just no. The undisputed king, though, of thirsty Democrats, without a doubt, is Andrew Cuomo. An entire nation of desperate libs and media figures is throwing themselves at the New York governor in an embarrassing way. His press briefings send lusty journalists into paroxysms of joy and moaning relief. A CNN op-ed proclaimed, "Thank God for Andrew Cuomo." Marie Claire went with, "My boyfriend Andrew Cuomo's new girlfriend is America. Trapped in my apartment, nowhere else to focus my hormones, the governor is the only man speaking directly to me for miles around." It fell to that voice of reason in a troubled time, Teen Vogue, to remind people that Andrew Cuomo is actually terrible. While many Democrats in red states brave steep resistance to defend progressive policies, Cuomo has blocked pro-worker policies in solid blue New York. He put single-payer health care on ice, refused to fully fund public schools, and cut critical housing vouchers for formerly homeless families. Great. I'm afraid that their sound reasoning will fall on deaf ears, though, because as often happens during times of crisis, and especially in a time such as this, with dueling unseen economic and viral terrors, we fall back on our natural human tendency to just want an authority figure, really any authority figure, to fix it all. Tell us what to do and when to do it. Hold our trembling hands, exude command, and make decisive-seeming decisions. For most of Trump's presidency, they pretended like his authoritarian rhetoric troubled them, but now they just want their own authoritarian.
In New York, which is now becoming a world capital of coronavirus impact, it's starting to feel like America has this one president in Washington, but a whole different president for the coronavirus crisis, who's the guy in charge in New York.
Chatter seems to be bubbling up all over about Democrats' desire to replace the affable but blundering Biden with Andrew Cuomo, a man widely known for his nastiness and vindictiveness, qualities they supposedly hate in Trump, but I guess they only actually hate it when it's not their guy doing petty revenge. The irony is that the substance of Cuomo's COVID response has actually not been that good. He's at least partly to blame for the fact that New York is in as bad a shape as it is right now. As well documented in Current Affairs, he was late to the game, failed to stock up on ventilators when health officials warned that the state would be unprepared for such a crisis, and is still pushing forward with damaging Medicaid cuts even as a pandemic rages. But he exudes confidence and command and has that big strongman energy that Dems are clamoring for, desperate for. He'd sell out workers, cut health care, and use the crisis to ramp up prison labor, but damn, he'd look good telling Trump to F off. Contrast Cuomo's brash assertiveness to this.
Why doesn't he just act like a president? That's a stupid way to say it.
You know, Donald Trump was asked on...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, probably best I don't.
Compare that to Cuomo, and it doesn't seem crazy that Dems may try to put Biden out to pasture in favor of their new beau. It doesn't matter what Cuomo does or doesn't stand for or what a jerk he is. People who call themselves progressives are suddenly hot for him and his authoritarian persona. As bad as that is, the yearning for an authoritarian to just govern me daddy doesn't stop there. And it's actually something we should be deeply wary of, as human an instinct as it is. Let's be totally clear here. In a crisis situation, certain unprecedented tactics and limitations on our individual freedom are necessary to preserve the collective. I fully embrace the travel limits and social distancing that public health officials recommend, and which should have been instituted more quickly than they were. But we do need to be absolutely committed to the temporary nature of all of these restrictions and deeply skeptical of surveillance, tracking, and restrictions that are not strictly necessary to preserve the public health. Stay educated about all the ways in which the government is adding new power and upending convention. Because we've all seen this movie before, guys. Once the government grabs power, whether it's Bush or Obama or Trump or Cuomo, they never give it back willingly. 9/11 is, of course, the obvious example. In an understandable rush to feel safe again, we allowed our elected leaders, and especially the executive, to hand themselves new unprecedented powers, which we may never fully wrest back. There's no reason to think this threat will be any different. A Washington Post op-ed written by a Trump-supporting conservative made the case recently that we are all socialists now. I wish that were the case. The truth is, as we lust for strongman leaders, border closures, and GPS tracking of infected individuals, we are all authoritarians now. Stuck in our homes and apartments, viewing each other with suspicion as potential threat vectors, unable to communicate with anyone outside of our quarantine buddies without having that communication monitored and tagged, we're essentially completely neutralized in terms of organizing any sort of mass citizen response or protest. Instead of empowerment, we're left desperate for a command and control figure to tell us how to be and what to think. A nation reduced to begging Andrew Cuomo to just govern me, Daddy. Sagar, what do you think of all the Cuomo buzz on the Democratic side?
It's a perfect encapsulation of what you're talking about, which is basically just Joe Biden in policy, brought back like 20 years, can speak, and, somewhat competent in terms of his response in the state. That's it. It's like, is that what people are so desperate for? I think the answer is actually yes, as you're talking about, which is that a large section of the Democratic electorate who just wants to beat Trump, get him out of there. They want somebody who can make the trains run on time and just, manage. I think it's managed neoliberalism. That's kind of what I've been calling it. And that's what they want. And Governor Cuomo, best example is that, the scion of a famous figure. Brother is a famous television host. He's the Democratic governor of New York, but he's that old school Democrat who's like, basically just a corporatist. We're very, very friendly with Wall Street. He works with the corporate Republicans in the New York State Senate. Yeah. It's like, it's the fantasy of politics that everybody in the Acela corridor aspires to. And Governor Cuomo.
I think there was a large hunger even before the coronavirus crisis for like the govern me daddy type authoritarian.
And Biden he could not rise to that occasion.
No, he doesn't have that. He's not a ruthless person the way that Andrew Cuomo reportedly is. I mean, to your point about I don't know if most of our viewers probably do know this, but Democrats have had a majority in the state Senate.
For the first time.
Cuomo is a Democrat, right? I think we all know that. And he essentially enabled the splinter group of Democrats to caucus with the Republicans to block the actual Democratic majority. By the way, guess who was a consultant to that? Liz Smith of Pete Buttigieg campaign fame to bring these things full circle. But remember the flirtation with Michael Avenatti?
Of course.
Early on in this, where there was this hunger for him and just imagining him up on stage telling Trump how it is.
We need our own Trump. That's what people always thought.
There's also the irony of Democrats have criticized, rightly so, some of the authoritarian sort of instincts or at least rhetoric of Trump. If he is an authoritarian, he's been a very poor one.
Yes.
But
I'm glad you at least recognize that.
But some of the rhetoric that is rather authoritarian, the shutting down of the free press, all that stuff. But what you come to realize is actually they just want their own version of that. And they're practically begging him now, which again, I understand. And all of these tactics and measures are justified, called for, et cetera. But they're basically begging him to be an authoritarian right now. They're like, please, seize control of industry. Please shut the entire nation down. Please close the borders. Do it fast. Do it for a longer period of time. So it's interesting how these things come full circle. But I think Cuomo is exactly what they're looking for. And his stock has risen so quickly, but I think that even preceding this crisis, he was the type of command and control figure with corporate ties and all of that they really were looking for to start with.
That's what baffles me. I mean, look, just because he can speak competently doesn't mean he's doing a particularly good job. I'm not saying he's doing a bad job. I think he's done fine for his state and all of that. But as you point out, him and Mayor de Blasio were not taking this seriously 2 months ago, whenever it actually mattered. Yeah. New York City public health officials were encouraging people to go to parades and saying that border closures were racist. So I think it's a big problem for him. And look, guys, you say, what does Governor Cuomo really stand for in the Democratic Party? Is it just management? Is that really all you want to vote for? And I actually think that for a section of the electorate, larger than I suspected, but a decent amount, that actually is enough.
Yeah.
And what did we just cover in the show? The enthusiasm levels for Biden are, down on the floor, 24%, were the lowest ever for a potential Democratic nominee. This gives them the perfect excuse.
Yeah, the media fawning over him, though, is truly embarrassing.
Oh, yeah.
And especially because, he is a sort of commanding figure in these press briefings, et cetera. But there's very little pushback about the policies that led New York to being in as bad a shape as it is right now. It's not an accident that the worst outbreak in the country at this point is in New York State and New York City. That falls none of this is entirely any of these leaders' fault, but some of it is, right? Some of it does does depend on your response, how quickly you were on top of it, how prepared you were going into this crisis. And Cuomo, very much like Trump, didn't take seriously that they needed to beef up on ventilators to be ready for something exactly like this, and has pursued these Medicaid cuts that have put hospitals in a tough spot even before this crisis started. I haven't seen any of that pushback from the media. Instead, they're just sort of fawning over the style rather than actually thinking about the substance. They're also just, I mean, it also gets into the sort of Trump derangement syndrome where they're just desperate to have like the Democratic white knight. He's in the role of Robert Mueller or whatever right now to contrast with, you know, the venal and incompetent Donald Trump. When the truth is there are some failings in both of their approaches.
Of course. And what did you just point out, which was it was that all they care about is the style. They don't actually care about the underlying policy. And that is the truth, is that, look, most people who are involved at the top completely failed whenever this thing happened. Now they're trying to project confidence, and I actually think that's a good thing. You know, he's going out there trying to do that. But, I mean, there's a lot of record to play with if he wants to become the Democratic nominee, and I don't think he would be all that hard to beat, given so much of his record, because he doesn't seem to particularly stand for anything. I mean, he doesn't understand any of the undercurrents of what we're talking about. You can't think of a governor who's a better friend of Wall Street or better encapsulates that, like, moneyed elite family scion and all of that.
Absolutely.
Everything that was rejected in 2016. So go for it, I guess.
Yeah, I think they are itching to figure out how to make that switch. I don't know if they'll be able to, but I think there are plenty of people who are thinking about that and having those conversations right now. All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.